Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of ZEISS Conversations. My apologies for the little bit of a delay there. We wanted to ramp up the excitement, and no, actually, we were having some technical difficulties, but we're beyond that now. We are locked, loaded, and ready to talk. We have got a great all-star team here today to talk to you about photojournalism and making sure that you get the passion that you're looking for in the frame, and really how to take that art and compose and make sure that you're telling the stories that you want to tell. Without further ado, we've got our guests here with us. On the left, you see Mark E. Johnson. He is the senior lecturer at the University of Georgia in Atlanta. In the center square is our guest, Jean Shifrin. She is a photojournalist based out of Georgia as well. To the right, you've got Tracy Page, as always, helping to helm the conversation here. And myself, I'm Tony. I'm with ZEISS Marketing, and we want to welcome everybody. Jean, Mark, welcome to the team this week.
Great to be here.
First thing we should do is qualify that Mark and the University of Georgia are in Athens and not Atlanta.
Oh,
okay. Get that out of the way.
Yes, we deal with rush minute out here, not rush day when it comes to traffic. So.
Yes. And Mark is responsible for the photojournalism program at Grady College. You said they're going to change names. What's the new name going to be?
We can't talk about that right now.
Okay, never mind.
Secrets.
Forget I said that. Secrets. I'm already in trouble. But anyway, Mark is at Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication, which I am a graduate of, ABJ.
Go Dogs.
At the University of Georgia. Go Dogs. In Athens, Georgia. So we've got that out of the way. And Jean is a phenomenal photojournalist that I have had the pleasure to get to know over the years. And she was with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Jean, am I allowed to say how long you were there?
Yeah, about 15 years.
And but she's retired now, but her work is amazing. And I think we've become huge mutual fans of each other. So awesome. As I started thinking about this conversation, first of all, Jean is a natural, and then I thought about Mark. You can help round out the conversation and teach me things about photojournalism that I don't know, since I'm more on the editorial and fine art side. So it's a lot of differences. Jean, we should let you run with it a little bit and tell us about yourself and your work and what your influences are.
Okay, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and when I discovered photojournalism in one of the best schools in the country, was in my home state of Missouri. I never even considered another career or another college. And the reason I was drawn to photojournalism is because I'm just curious about people, how they live, cultures, wanted to travel. I love literally getting to see how other people live, and being a photojournalist gives you an entree into people's lives that very few people get. So I started working immediately after college, small newspaper. I also like to write, so I did a lot of my own writing early on. And when I started working, it was photojournalism was still all black and white, negative film. A few years into my career, newspapers started printing color and running lifestyle pages and fashion, things that I knew nothing about. So I left the newspaper and started working at a commercial photography studio. I just lucked out because it turned out to be one of the best things I could have done, with a man named Nick Vidros in Kansas City, who's now very well-known, highly sought after commercial photographer. So I learned lighting and color and fashion and all those things. And then I took those skills and went back to newspaper. And as a photojournalist, you not only need to be a documentary photographer, but I needed to know how to do portraiture, fashion, aerials, interiors, spot news, sports, portraiture. You kind of had to do everything. So it's just been an incredible career experience. I just couldn't imagine doing anything else.
Gosh, you don't even think about all the other things. I mean, I know you've been all over the world with the AJC, and I didn't even think about that you had to do architecture or, interviews or, sports or whatever was required. That's just brings in whole other elements to it.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't that way when I started my career, but when I saw things changing and I needed to get those skills, I used to haul around lights in a Hasselblad to photograph portraits for the newspaper on a regular basis. So, oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay, everybody turn off your phones.
And it's on
in my
silent,
class
but it
every
goes
time.
through my computer, so sorry.
It was just our icebreaker. That's what we needed to.
But yeah, so as a photojournalist, you really do need a lot of different skills. I have to say though that if I only did documentary photography, that would have been absolutely fine. I love portraiture. If I never shot sports, that would have been perfectly fine. But it was great to have all those different skills and exposure. So I know Mark can probably speak to, I don't know what he's teaching his students now. I know it's multimedia, but that's all a whole new thing that wasn't a part of my
Well, I love what you started with about wanting to explore cultures and meet people and tell their stories, because that's still what we're doing here. I mean, I went through the journalism program at Syracuse University 30 plus years ago, and the core concepts that they taught me then are the same core concepts that I'm teaching now. It's this idea of asking questions and observing and figuring out what a community, what an audience needs to know, so that they understand what's happening in their community, and then they can make good decisions about how to move the community forward. Yeah. So as a photojournalist, really you're just sort of a conduit. I mean, there's a lot of photojournalists that rightfully talk about the artwork that they produce, and artwork is a phrase that for me has always been it doesn't suit what I did. It's not what I teach now, because it's all about how do we build that connection between people who are doing things in a community and people who need to understand what's happening in that community. And photography is a wonderful tool to be able to do that. You know, it's the role that I'm trying to get my students to play is to be sort of that observer, to bring the audience to some place that they weren't. When I was working as a photographer, and I spent about a dozen years working as a photojournalist and editor, my goal was for nobody to know who I was. Mm-hmm. So that when somebody picked up the newspaper or picked up the magazine or loaded up our webpage, they were brought to that location that I was, and I disappeared. You know, if nobody knew who Marky Johnson was, nobody ever looked at that photo credit, I was perfectly happy. Mm-hmm. But to your point, yeah, I mean, we are in this wonderful time now where when we were coming of age as journalists, you know, you were a photographer or you were a writer, and maybe in some places you got to do a little bit of both. But you know, our students now will go out and they'll carry a camera that has the ability to not do just still photos, but also to record video and to record audio, and to assemble all of these different elements into a much better way of telling stories. It's, you know, there's moments when I watch what my students are producing and I think, okay, I want to get out of the classroom and go back out in the field and tell these stories now, because the tools are so much better.
My dad used to ask me all the time, Jane, you've been doing this so long, why don't you become an editor? Why don't you go into management? And I was like, oh my God, that's the last thing in the world I want to do. The reason I do this is because I want to be outside, you know, I want to be out meeting people and telling stories. So never had any desire to do anything else.
Yeah, the first week when I became a director of photography after being an assistant chief photographer, I suddenly thought, oh, I have made a horrible mistake in my life. But one of the things that it took me a while to figure out was how do you judge progress? You know, as photographers, as photojournalists, we'd go out and we'd tell a story, and at the end of the day, we had either a set of prints or a set of slides or a set of files that showed what it was that we produced. As an editor, I got to the end of the day and I know what I had done. And it took a much longer time to sort of figure out that the role of the editor is in making sure that the photographers have all the tools that they need. And maybe we can pivot a little bit, since we want to talk about sort of what it means to be a photojournalist and how that separates from photography. You know, there's a whole string of things that you have to go through to figure out what it is that you're going to make a picture of. You know, I tell my students on the first day of class that the two hardest things to learn in photojournalism are where to point the camera and when to push the button. Everything else is just process. You know, the process of photography, of how do you adjust all the mechanical settings on your camera of ISO, aperture, shutter speed, how do you focus, how do you zoom, even into the aesthetics of how do you compose. A lot of that is just sort of process to get to the point where you're ready to go out and figure out what's important. Mm-hmm. And Jean, in looking through some of your images, you know, one of the things that I loved in there was the sense of intimacy, that I felt like I was standing right there, that I was looking in the window of the vehicle, that I was in the room that these people were in, and that ability to pull an audience in that's the magic of photography and journalism for me.
I appreciate you saying that. And obviously that's the goal. And that's, a lot of the stories that I was drawn to were people that didn't really have a voice and whose stories would not be known otherwise. And so there's a real sense of responsibility to do those stories well and do them justice and with respect. So I really appreciate you saying that. But one of the things when I was teaching, a lot of students would ask me, how do you gain the trust? Like, how do you get into strangers' lives and let them, how do they let you come in and take pictures? And because the students, lots of times they'll normally go over their friends and family and, well, you're comfortable shooting your friends and family because they know you, you know them. But how do you go into approach a complete stranger and get them to trust you and let you into their lives? And to me, that's far and away my favorite part of everything I ever did. And I'm was always completely surprised that someone would let me do that, because I have to tell you, I would not let someone do that. I wouldn't let someone come into my life and follow me around all day with a camera.
So if Tony, Tracy, and I hop in our car and drive into Atlanta right now, you're not going to let us in your house, is what you're saying?
No, not with a camera. The thing is that it's nowadays people are, whether it's with Instagram or selfies or whatever, everybody's looking their best. They're stylized. In photojournalism, I'm documenting people when their children are dying, when they're struggling with after a flood, after some natural disaster. So people are at their, lots of times their worst, and they let you in at these private moments, these difficult moments, painful moments. And that is just such a great gift that people do that. And I tried to honor that by telling their story and letting other people know what's going on in the world, basically. That
Jean, I have some questions about those moments, because I mean, my understanding of photojournalism, and this is where I'm such a novice, is that you can't create the moments, you're documenting the moments. So where as an editorial portrait photographer, I can create the moments, I can talk to them, I can create the emotion, I can direct them where I want them to be. Tell me about your process when you're doing that, since you don't have that tool available to you.
Well, usually, like, I think, Tony, I think you have a couple of pictures, the black and whites in the beginning. There's, I think, if the man watching TV.
Yep.
Have that one. That was actually a story I did when I was a student in college. And I used to just find stories anywhere. I would drive through a small town. I'd walk down the street. I'd eavesdrop on a conversation in the grocery store, whatever it might be. And as a student, you had to keep coming up with stories. And so I would drive around, and I saw this man in a small town with a big push broom, literally sweeping the street. He was a street sweeper. And I just thought, well, that's interesting. I've never really seen that before. What is that like? So I started talking to him and ended up doing a story and spent a lot of time with him. And it's one of my oldest pictures, but it's one of my favorites. Is I went to visit him one day. He lived by himself in a big old house, but he only used like 1 or 2 rooms. And he had just gotten his first ever television set, and he didn't even know I was there. He just was so stuck on this TV, and it wasn't even showing a picture. It was just snow. It was just static, but he was still mesmerized by it. But that's my favorite subject, that, and the little girl getting dressed by her grandmother and riding in the truck with her grandfather. I don't know if you have those available, but that was a story that ended up being a long-term, years-long project on grandparents raising their grandchildren. But the way I found this family is I was doing a story on country nurses, and I was in the waiting room, and there was an old man in there with the most sad-looking blue eyes. And he went in to get his flu shot or something. And when he left, the nurse told me, yeah, he and his wife had just adopted their granddaughter because the mother couldn't care for her. And this was before HIPAA rules. You know, a lot of the ways that I used to get stories, I'm not sure you can do it anymore. People are a little more leery for one thing, but I was just fascinated by their story. And I said, I've got to meet these people. I've got to find out about them. I need to know what this story is. And I had to just cold call them. I called them up and said, you don't know who I am. I understand that you're raising your granddaughter and I'd love to come and talk to you. So if it's a story that I think I'm gonna really want to do long-term, I would go meet with the people, didn't even bring my cameras, didn't even talk about, you know, taking pictures that first day. I would listen to them, get their story, try and develop a bond and a trust so that they would let me come in. And Rita said, you know, well, when I told her what I wanted to do, she said, well, sure, but like why would anyone be interested in our story? I mean, we're just country folk and, you know, nobody's going to be interested. And it turned out to be just an amazing story. And they just acted like I wasn't there. I mean, they just went on about their life, which is, like I said, it's just such a gift. And I would talk to some people. Sometimes I'd want to do a story and it was clear that it wasn't gonna work out. They would clean the house before I got there and they'd put on their makeup and the kids would be in clean clothes and, you know, they weren't doing their real life. And so it didn't always work, but I think the key is just to really get your subjects to trust you, to, I truly believed in their story and wanted to tell it. So it wasn't fake. I wasn't just doing it for publicity or anything like that. You know, these are people that I was willing to invest a lot of time and energy into. I spent weekends, holidays, driving 3 hours each way to photograph this family for a year and a half. So it's because I truly believed in their story. It needed to be told, and they were the perfect subject.
I think that, and that's one of the things, Mark, we were talking about previous to going live, is there's a lot of emphasis now. People come to the technology and they want to talk about the technology, and it's really being able to see beyond it and to being able to see not just within the frame, but to actually, you know, envision that detail, that passion that you want to create. I mean, I'm fixated on the one inside the truck, and just the way that you frame that image really draws our attention. And that's not thinking about, you know, what ISO am I shooting at this. This is thinking about how do I need to portray it, and you've really just done a fantastic job with that.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that I try to get across to my students on the first day of our intro class, I tell them that there are 4 things that if they can do well, they'll succeed in this class. And the 4th one is the most important one, and that's care. If they don't care about the people they're documenting, if they don't care about these stories, and if they don't care about the people they're telling the stories to, the images will be cold. You can care all you want about cameras and lenses and lights and megapixels and software and all of these different pieces of technology, and that's great. I mean, as we were talking about before, I'm a world-class geek. You know, in addition to being, you know, on the faculty here at the college, I'm also the chief technology officer for the college. So basically everything that gets plugged into a wall in here in some way, shape, or form, I have to figure out how it's going to fit into our plan. But at the end of the day, I don't care about cameras and I don't care about lenses. I care about people, and I care about making sure that we honor their stories, and that when we find those stories of people who are doing amazing things, or we find those stories about people who represent larger issues in our communities that can bring awareness to a situation, you know, that's when I get really excited about a story. I want my students' images to go out and affect change. I don't necessarily want them to have a point of view in which direction that change happens, but I want them to be preparing an audience with a body of knowledge, a body of information, so that when they go to the city council meeting and they speak up, they know what they're talking about. When they go into an election, a polling place, they know why they're voting for certain folks. You know, those are the things that are really important. I mean, there's Gene, you kind of alluded to, we spend a lot of time with people in the darkest days of their lives, and that's true. What I tell my students is we have this really bizarre relationship with our communities in that we tend to spend time with people in the best days and the worst days of their lives. Yep. We're there when they win the state championship for softball. We're also there the day after the prom and somebody's died in a DUI, in a car crash. The mental toll that takes on journalists over time is really immense. Yeah. But it's also really important that we be there to bear witness to all of these different things every day.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I'm just absolutely fascinated about how you can capture these moments and be a fly on the wall at the same time. And I love your ability to do that, to get people to trust you. And so you spent a year and a half with this this couple and their granddaughter. And do I remember that you got a book out of that?
Well, no, I got a Nikon documentary sabbatical grant.
Okay.
It allowed me to, over the course of a year, have 3 months away from my newspaper duties to work on this story. But I spent a lot of time outside of that 3 months. I mean, I would go back to work full time, but then I would go on the weekends, holidays, whenever I could. They lived several hours away, so I had to plan pretty carefully. But there was a point when it was going to turn into a book, and it didn't, unfortunately. But unfortunately, that grant is no longer active. I think there's maybe 15 people got it or something. They gave it to one person a year. I don't know the stat for some reason.
It's amazing that you were able to do that, because I think of photojournalism as being so fast paced and moving from story to story. So that the idea that you were able to take a year and a half and have this relationship with this family and document what they were going through, I think is a pretty amazing experience that is unique to you.
Well, I've had several stories that I've done over a year or more, and it's not full-time exclusively doing that story. You're going back and forth, but that's my favorite way to work. One reason I'm not at a newspaper any longer is because the pace has changed so much that ability to spend time to get to know your subjects and really tell the story is very difficult to do now. Everything is, you would go to an assignment, and within 5 minutes, your editor would be calling you up and saying, can you send me 3 pictures right away? That's not my preference. That's not my background and training. And so it's, I don't really know. There's a few newspapers in the country, I think, that still have some outlet for that. I think it's much rarer than it was when I was starting out in my career.
So I'd like to challenge you on that a little bit, because the traditional idea of thinking about newspaper photojournalism was very much sort of the 3 to 5 assignments a day, and you're going to spend half an hour here, drive half an hour there. Mm-hmm. And then, if you found a really deep project that your editors wanted to support, you'd get a day or 2 days a week to go work on that.
Right.
And I agree 100% that the pace of publication has gone through the roof. It used to be you go out, you do your 3 assignments, and then you come back to the newspaper and you process your film, and you either make prints or scan or download your cards, and then you'd start publishing after you'd had a chance to sort of reflect and figure out what's the story, what was it that you just saw. And the pace now is very much you're at the festival, you make a bunch of images, you download them into your phone, you post them to Instagram, Twitter, to the online website, and then you're driving to the next assignment, so that there's not that chance for reflection. But one of the things that has changed is that there used to be a significant cost to publishing documentary work, to publishing these larger photo stories. You had to have either a weekly or monthly magazine, or you had to beg and plead and try and negotiate for a couple of pages in the print product. Mm-hmm. The advantage to the digital realm is that the cost difference between publishing 1 photograph and 15 is 0. I mean, it's all in whether you have the time and the support to produce the work. It's much easier to publish now. It's also cheaper in some ways for photographers to work on personal projects. And this is something I encourage all of my students to do, is they've got their 10 or 15 assignments they've got to do for me throughout the course of the semester. But if they're not out there working on something they're passionate about, they'll burn out pretty quick. You've got to have those stories that you feel need to be told, that you're doing because you believe they're important, not because somebody else told you to go do this.
I'm just coming off of that myself. I've just spent 2 days doing a personal photo essay story. So it's, and Tony can tell you, I mean, this has been burning in my head for 2 years, and I finally did it this week.
Oh, that's great.
And that's how it goes.
Yep.
I mean, we can't get these things that we've seen, we've heard, we've imagined, we can't get them out of our head until we actually get them out of our head.
Right.
That's true. And Mark, I like your point about the technology does allow lots of options and vehicles for beautifully presenting documentary work. So that is a real plus. I hope people continue to do it.
No, I think they are. I mean, I've been teaching out here at UGA now for 15 years, and I taught for a couple of years at Syracuse University while I was back there doing my grad work. And, I've got these students that, just about every week somebody sends me a link to their own website and said, I've been working on this for the last couple of months or a couple of weeks, or I finally had a chance to go spend 48 hours with this person that I really wanted to tell their story. And, they're self-publishing some of this, which, that we could, the underlying thing that we haven't touched on that we can and just sort of bring the overall feel of this entire conversation down is the financial side of this, because it's much harder to make a living, to build a career around photojournalism now. I mean, Gene, you and I were there at sort of the tail end of the golden years when newspapers, if you owned a newspaper, you owned a license to print money up until about 2000, and then everything started to change there. I think about the Athens Banner Herald, the newspaper out here. When I moved to Athens 15 years ago, there was a director of photography and 4 staff photographers and a staff videographer. And now there's 1 photographer. So they've gone from 6 people doing visuals for that publication to 1 in just 15 years. And even that 1 is, running constantly to try and keep up.
When I started at the Atlanta Constitution, the photo department had 40 people. Photographers and editors, and I think now the entire staff of a city of 6 million almost people is 4.
Yeah.
Well, in a lot of cases now they give the reporters a camera and say, or a cell phone, and say, hey, you need to do your own photography. And they're sending people out there who have no training in this at all, and expecting them to produce publishable work. And it's I'm hoping at some point, I just read an article in Rangefinder that seemed to indicate at some point we might start swinging back a little bit, but there's a balance between exclusivity and inclusivity on photographers. It's now the technology is not so expensive that it keeps people from being able to do this, but the skills are not present. So that's what's now in creating the exclusivity is people who aren't trained and don't have an understanding of the medium at all. I am curious about, Gene, I mean, I think it's so fascinating that you got to travel all over the world doing this kind of in the heyday of photojournalists going out and covering stories instead of images being beamed to us all from the internet. So some of the places you went to, maybe you could talk about that for a moment.
I think Tony, you've got some pictures of there's someone looking through the veil.
Yep.
And that was a reporter and I spent 7 weeks traveling to 4 different countries to show the effects of Islamic fundamentalism on women. And it was, I could spend days talking about that. It was so fascinating, but it had to be a female reporter and female photographer because men would not be allowed to speak to or photograph the women. I really was not allowed to photograph the women. It was the most difficult and frustrating assignment I've ever had, but that was, some of the first images that the Western world saw of women in burqas, and the effects of the fundamentalism on their lives. So that was a really exciting thing to be a part of, to be someone, and that's what we're talking about, to be witness to that and to be able to show people things that they otherwise would not be able to see. And similarly, I've made 5 trips to India. This was just on my own as a pro bono piece because I'm so interested in the subject. I think, Tony, you've got some pictures of the 2 hands and the little girl in the classroom, the 2 ladies in a leprosy colony. So I'm documenting the work of a nonprofit organization that is based in Atlanta, Georgia, started by a woman here who's a dear friend of mine now. And her goal is to eradicate leprosy. Most people in the United States are not even aware that leprosy still exists in the world. And it does very much. There's about 1,000 leprosy colonies in India. It's present in other countries in the world as well. But this is something that people just were not able to see otherwise. And there's a stigma, there's a fear, there's ignorance. And I was able to spend a lot of time with the children from the leprosy colonies who attend the school at Rising Star. And they're some of the most beautiful children in the world. The people are so kind. And, they just, to see people get a disease that then alters the course of their life forever and they're outcast. They're literally in India called untouchables. And it just really gives you a perspective on your life when you travel and see other cultures and how other people live and what kinds of things they face on a daily basis. It really gives you perspective on your life. And so that's one of the things that I really love about photojournalism. It just gives you great perspective and insight and empathy.
Tracy, you were talking a little bit about sort of handing reporters their smartphones and telling them to go out and make pictures there. The changes in technology over the last 2 decades have really democratized the photographic process. There used to be an awful lot of technical skill that you had to master before you could get to the point where you were dealing with content. And now a lot of that has disappeared. You can pull out your American Express card and walk down to Best Buy and buy $10,000 worth of cameras and lenses, and the technical quality of the images is going to be the same as any of the 3 of us who've been doing this for a while. The question goes back to sort of where I started with this idea of where do you point the camera and when do you push the button? And as photojournalists working today, we have to be much more aware of what's going on inside of our communities or in the communities that we're going to. Traveling to India, if you travel to India and say, I'm going to do stories about the poor there, and you're just walking around and you're taking pictures of poor folks without really understanding why or what's going on there, there's this terrible phrase, it's called poverty tourism. And that's not what journalists should be doing. You have to go in and you have to pay attention to the details to figure out sort of why this story matters and how do you get somebody to care about it. I didn't send along any images that I worked on, but Tony, if you can, the image of the bed that I sent along.
Yep.
Back in the spring, teaching here at UGA, we closed the campus in mid-March and sent everybody home, and most folks went back to their hometowns and were dealing with shelter-in-place situations. And so I had to figure out, how do I have my students continue to tell stories, continue to work on documentary photojournalism? That's the main class I was teaching. And so I had them start photographing their own situations and sending images back each week that we would meet online like this and talk about them. And this is an image that one of my seniors, Emma Goldsmith, sent back. And I brought it up and I thought, okay, this is interesting. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And then I opened up the caption on it. And if you'll permit me, I'm going to read you the caption that she sent with this. And this is what Emma wrote with this image. My dad's slippers and pajama pants are left unworn on the night of April 1, 2020 in our home in Albany, Georgia. The other day, my mom and I were talking on the phone about how there were so many more people wearing masks out in public in Albany than there were in Athens. And she said, well, in Athens, a lot of people probably still don't know anyone personally who's died. Well, in Albany, we do. And this was the night we found out. She was a probate judge in Doherty County and the wife of one of my dad's lifelong best friends. She was also one of the most kind-hearted people I've ever known. When my dad found out after midnight, he changed out of his pajamas and slippers, left them there in his room, and drove over to his friend's house to tape a note on his window. And this ability to pay attention to these little things, it's not the ambulances going in and out of the hospital. It's not the stretchers. It's not the public funerals. It's these little details in life that when you start to see them, that's when you start to be able to tell these stories.
Yeah.
Emma's image here it floored me. I mean, as a photograph, it's simple, it's clean, it's straightforward. But as a piece of journalism, as something that's going to connect an audience to the personal experience of her dad, I mean, that last part about driving over to his friend's house and taping a note on his door because he can't go in. He can't, I mean, it's not safe to go into the house at this point in time, but he wants to reach out and connect with his best friends. I mean, these are the moments that out here at the college we're training students for. We're training students to pay attention to these little details. Jean, just like the work that you did in India and the story about the grandparents taking in their kids, this is something that the average person is going to walk by. It's not something that screams, this is going to make a great photograph, right? It's not going to have beautiful light. It's not going to have amazing composition. But it's got to have meaning, and that's where photojournalism comes into photography. It's got to have this long-lasting meaning. You have to make people care, and if you can't make people care with your pictures, I'm not entirely sure what you're doing with a camera in your hand.
This is, to me, this is a little bit speaking to the future of where photojournalism and photography is going. Is that we have to be able to deliver something that our customers can't deliver on their own. And as photojournalists, you have to be able to deliver a story that somebody with a cell phone or a camera who doesn't understand what they're doing can't deliver. And so you have to be able to deliver the impact.
Yes. And
that's what you're teaching your students. And Jean, that's what you have that impact, that story, that knowing when to press the button. We can all press the button, but it's knowing when to press the button and knowing that moment has impact, I think is where we have to go. And that's what is going to continue to create the need for photojournalists. So that I know that article I was just reading was talking about, leveling the playing field, but for somehow we have to figure out how to make the playing field not level again so that we can continue to work and we can continue to train future photojournalists, and this doesn't become a lost art.
Right.
That's a really good point. And I wanted to add to what Mark was saying about, and you, Tracy, as well, the impact. As photojournalists, sometimes you wonder, is what you're doing making a difference at all? Is anybody paying attention? Is anybody seeing it? And the work I did in India was, those images were used. Becky, the founder, would travel around the world and make presentations to try and educate people about leprosy. It still exists. It's horrible. People through no fault of their own are stigmatized. Even if you don't have the disease, the children who are born in a leprosy colony are stigmatized. They can't get a job, education. They become professional beggars on the street. And now, so she, through her amazing work and energy and using the images to, rather than just tell people, to actually show people as well. The kids that were 5 years old when I started have now graduated college, which for a child from a leprosy colony was literally unheard of. And so that's a real impact. I mean, they're doctors, they're lawyers. It's unbelievable what has happened over there, what this woman has done. And so to know that, even if something you did had a little bit of impact on that is a pretty cool thing.
Tony, the other image that I sent you, don't bring it up just yet. I want to talk about it a little bit, if you don't mind. In the last fall, a year ago, I had an email from a student who's not in not in our college. There's a graduate student in ecology, And he said that he had been poking around online and he came across my documentary photojournalism class and he wanted to know if he could take it. And as a general rule of thumb, our classes run at capacity and we don't take students from outside the college, but I happen to have an open slot. And we had a bunch of conversations back and forth. There's a couple of prerequisites that he wasn't going to have. He sent me some portfolio images and I thought, yeah, I'll take a chance and see what happens. And so the student, Krishna Sharma, shows up in my class and just dives right in. I mean, the images he sent me in his portfolio were technically magnificent, beautiful light, beautiful compositions, not a ton of great content, but the technical stuff was all there. And I figured, all right, if he wants to try, let's see what happens. He was part of that cohort that, halfway through the semester, we dispersed everybody back around the country. And he was still here in Athens. And over the summer, as some of the protests started popping up over the Black Lives Matter movement and the killing of George Floyd and others, he went downtown one day and he went down to photograph the protesters, as almost every one of my students that was still here in Athens was doing in some way, shape, or form. But he ended up making this image, and if you can bring it up, Tony, that was really kind of surprising because on one side of the frame, you have these protesters on Broad Street, across the street from the Arch, which is the ceremonial entrance to the university. And just out of the frame on the right-hand side behind them is where the Confederate War Memorial was here in Athens. And every day for weeks and weeks and weeks, there was a group of protesters out there. On the left-hand side, you have a bunch of spring graduates who had come back to do their graduation photo in front of the Arch. And it's this staggering split between students who are protesting for equality and students who are celebrating what they've just achieved. And Krishna does not have a big social media presence, but one of his friends shared it and it kind of blew up and got shared in an awful lot of places around the country. And what was interesting is that he found out afterwards that there was some impact from this because folks from the national sorority saw this and said, you got to pay. They reached back out to the sorority here at the University of Georgia, apparently, and said, you got to pay attention to sort of what you're doing, because this split of these two very different groups in the same location. I mean, it's an image that every time I bring it up and look at it, I keep thinking, I can't believe that this happened, and I can't believe that. I can believe it. Krishna is a brilliant photographer, and I'm trying really hard to turn him from ecology into a journalist, but he seems really, really interested in ecology, and I'm going to keep trying until he graduates to turn him into a journalist, because he saw that moment. He figured out that the story wasn't just over here on one side of the frame; it was both sides of the frame, and putting them together and building this composition. That to me is the power of what you can do with an image. It raised awareness and it got people talking about these two sides to life here in Athens.
Well, and we keep talking about the point too of not being tone deaf. Mm-hmm. And this image shows tone deafness. So he completely nailed it.
I think I agree with you. I think that's a very valid read of this. And there was a lot of criticism of the women on the left-hand side of that frame. But at the same time, they've spent 4 years working really, really hard to get to their graduation moment. And they have a right to be able to celebrate that. And so, the quick read of this for me and for most others was, how dare they be over on that side, with their sorority stoles on and their nice dresses and posing for this photo, while there's all this other stuff going on. But at the same time, if you want to focus entirely on one side of that image and say, this is more important than that, you're not really seeing the broader society that we live in. There are all of these different stories that are going on. And as journalists, we have a responsibility to tell as many of these stories so that we understand as many different parts of our community. It's a difficult image, but had the protesters not been there on the right-hand side of that frame, and it was just a photograph of a group of women who had graduated successfully, who had made it through the University of Georgia, we wouldn't think anything negative of it, because they have a right to be proud of that moment.
They do have a right to be proud of that moment, but we do try to also tell people about the optics of situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they are caught in the optics.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I mean, so I think this is a great example of those optics. I mean, he just really did a great job with this, showing, two sides of the coin.
Yeah.
I mean, because she doesn't talk publicly, none of us really know what Melania Trump's jacket meant, but for the rest of us, she had absolutely every right to wear whatever she wanted to wear, but we see tone deafness and we see bad optics.
Mm-hmm.
And your student just did a great job here of showing that.
But the thing that we try and get folks to do what I want my students to do is I want them to produce images that start a conversation. I tell them that their images need to do, a good image does three things. One, it educates us on what's happening in a community. It illuminates, and that it puts that moment in context. And then lastly, it resonates. We build the image in a way that has a good composition and nice light and some fluidity to it so that people want to come back and consume more images. So that idea of educate, illuminate, resonate is one of the many, I want to say that I have a mantra. I have about 27 of them that I go through in any given semester. But I think this is one of those images that does that. It's got an interesting composition because you have sort of this split with the arch separating two sides of the same university, two sides of the same community there. And it sparks that conversation. I mean, the conversation in social media, Krishna wrote about it. If you poke around on the Athens Banner Herald's website, onlineathens.com, you can find an editorial that he wrote about this, and sort of the impact that it ended up having. But it's important to understand the thing that frustrated me a little bit was there was this immediate negative reaction to it. And I understand where it comes from. But at the same time, as journalists, we have to be open-minded and we have to say, okay, why is this group over here protesting and why is this group over here celebrating? And realizing that they are both valid things that we get to do. But the optics are absolutely troubling in it. I mean, it does have that feel of tone deafness, right? So,
but that he had the instinct to back up and capture both.
Right.
I think that's pretty, that says a lot about who he is as a photographer. And I think that a lot of times we forget to watch everything going on around us, and we just get so tunnel visioned with what we can see through our camera, and that's pretty amazing. And Jean, I keep coming back to your images too, because you've got these stunningly composed images, and yet you're not directing it, you're observing. And I think that you can observe for those moments is pretty amazing. And I know that we could have a whole nother conversation on the technicality of what you both do. And one of the things, maybe we should come back and talk about this, but one of the things I'm curious about is how do you light for photojournalism? Because obviously, I mean, to me, unless you're doing like a profile photo of somebody, which I know I have the pleasure of getting to teach a little bit about that next week to Mark's class at the University of Georgia, and I'm very excited. But I mean, lighting has to be what your camera can deliver and not what an outside, moving an outside light can deliver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is a difficult thing. It's probably easier now because cameras work much better in low light than they did in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when I was doing a lot of work. But I can say for sure that there were times that I was not able to get the pictures I wanted because of technical issues. The light there just wasn't enough light. The lens couldn't handle it, the film, whatever it might be. So you do learn to look for the light. And I think that's a great skill to have even when you can control the light, because your eye is now trained to be able to find that available light. For example, the family, the grandparents, they lived in a trailer. They lived in a double-wide trailer. And they had one room that they mostly lived in that had a set of sliding glass doors. So there was a lot of natural light, but there was also a lot of direct fall off. So, there'd be a difference in exposure was incredible from, few inches in the room. It'd be in bright sunlight or deep shade. But you do really just learn you just train your eye. And there are definitely times that I was not able to get what I wanted, but I know some photographers just shoot and maybe you don't pay too much attention to composition. For me, it just comes, I just naturally want the composition to feel right for me. And so there are times probably when I maybe should have taken a picture when I didn't, because the composition just didn't feel right. And you learn to just, you step an inch or two to the left or right, or, squat, or, just move tiny little things can make such a huge difference. And for me, that's just a big deal that I've always paid attention to. So it eventually becomes a natural thing. But I think it's rare to get when everything just works right. Your subject, the moment, the light, the composition, you're in focus, the exposure is correct. That just doesn't happen every day. And so it's a lifetime of learning. I mean, I think photography is literally, you just learn it, you keep learning. You're constantly practicing.
I agree completely. And I tell my students that they've got to practice every single day, and I still practice every single day, even though I haven't made a living off of my cameras in a really long time. But I think one of the things that separates the professionals out from the folks who just go out and make pictures for fun is this idea that the professional is going to bring back the picture every single time. They're going to figure out how to compose, how to deal with the low light or the bright light or the busy backgrounds. They're going to use this tool set that we have in photography and put it in service to the moment, in service to the story that's being told. I was reading, Larry Fink is a documentary photographer whose work is 180 degrees away from anything that I've ever done, 180 degrees away from anything I've ever taught. But I love the way he lights and composes in his documentary work. And he did a great book on composition a couple of years ago. And I pulled out this quote that I remind myself of all the time. And he said, "Sometimes you are the victim of what is real." And it's this idea that we don't get to control the world as journalists. We are presented with the situation in front of us, and we have to make a series of choices of where are we going to stand, what lens to choose, what aperture and shutter speed are we going to plug into the camera, and what moment are we going to select out of taking this four-dimensional world that has height and width and depth and time, and compressing it into a two-dimensional world and trying to get that to represent the reality that was present at that moment. It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And it's the thing I want to do every single day for the rest of my life, is to figure out how to make that work.
It's easy to go into a situation that is visually fascinating, whether it's the color, the light, things are happening. It's not that difficult to make great pictures in those situations. As a photojournalist working for a newspaper every day, you're assigned to things that there's not a lot happening. You can't control the lighting. You can't control the background, the clutter, what people are doing, and so it becomes very difficult and challenging to make meaningful storytelling photographs in those situations. And to me, that's when their true talent comes out, if you can come back with pictures from those situations.
It's much easier to make a great photograph of the 4th of July fireworks parade. It's much harder to do the city council meeting the next night and make an interesting picture out of that. So,
well, you two, we have managed to blow through the hour. You were both amazing, and I really appreciate all of the conversation, and I hope we have more of this. You've had a lot of people chime in who know both of you, which I just think is great. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to have had both of you on and have had this great conversation. And of course, you've just sparked so much in my brain that sometimes it feels like I don't know which direction to go in, because Mark, like you said, go out every day and try to keep pushing this, and that we're so honored that this is what we get to do. And I hope that this is part of showing the world why we need to continue creating and supporting photojournalists. That this is a part of telling the stories of everyone, and not just the rich and famous, but getting out there and telling all of our stories, and the stories that weave the fabric of life that we're living, is important work. And I hope that this is something that continues, and that everyone starts to see and continue to support the need for this. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yes, and thanks, Mark. I ended up taking some notes as you were talking too, because a lot of the conversations that I have with all photographers is exactly what you're talking about. You need to have an idea and a passion of what you want to put on the screen, on the image. Otherwise it's not worth clicking the shutter. I absolutely agree with you that you need to know when to click and where to be to take that photo. And that's what separates good from great. And thank you very much for those words. And Jean, just your photography is just fantastic. The detail of the emotion in the imagery. We can call it photojournalism. We can call it fine art. What you're creating is just fantastic on the screen, and I appreciate you sharing those with us today.
Well, thank you. I couldn't actually see the screen, so I don't know if people were seeing the images or not.
I got most of them up for you, yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And thank you, Tracy, so much for inviting me to do this, and Mark for joining me on this conversation, and Tony for all of your expertise. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. It was great to have all of you.
Can I insert a quick little pitch for two things for folks who want to learn a little bit more about photojournalism? The first one is the primary association for photojournalists in the world is the National Press Photographers Association, which happens to be headquartered right here in my building at the University of Georgia. So if you're interested in photojournalism, that's a website, nppa.org, that you can take a look at. And also one of the best photojournalism conferences in the world is the Atlanta Photojournalism Seminar, which is held every fall in Atlanta. This year, it's a fully online seminar. So it's the first or second week in November. The website for that is photojournalism.org. And I know that we've got, I know, Jean, you were on the board for the seminar for many years, and we've got some of the other seminar folks that are watching as well. But photojournalism.org, you can see the schedule there. They'll be publishing sort of who the speakers are going to be for that. And this year, it's completely free, I believe. So if you want to see some great work, photojournalism.org is a great place to go look.
Place to be.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, and I've put them in the chat for everybody, and I'll also add that to the page as this conversation will be archived for later viewing as well. Well, thanks to everybody for coming here, and thanks for being part of our group. Tracy, as always, thanks for leading a terrific conversation. Jean, your photos are fantastic, and I can't wait to see more. And Mark, let's touch base after this. There's certain things that you were talking about that I'd love to learn more about too, and I'm going to be going to those websites myself. Thanks.
Come on out, take a class.
Absolutely. Would love to do that. Thanks to everybody, and thanks to you for viewing with us today. We've had a great time here, learned a lot. Keep your passion going, and make sure that you're always creating. No matter what you're doing, make sure what you're putting yourself and your emotions and the passion of what you're viewing within that frame. Thanks again, and we'll see you again the next time on ZEISS Conversations.
Bye.